Good morning. All right, so we start this is Godly Play. I'll start by explaining what we're doing today. Downstairs, we do Godly Play with our older kids. It is a curriculum based on the development of children and how we learn and participating in stories that we're told instead of just listening to them. And so we've been moving through the Old Testament. We're currently at the Exodus, which will be our story today. So downstairs, we always take a moment before we get started, get our wiggles out, and then we ring the bell. Can anybody tell me why we ring the bell? What? Why do we ring the bell? Zoe. So that we can pay attention to the story, so that we can practice what? Listening, right, Keel? Listening to who? Just me? No. I mean, me is important, right? But just me? Are we just listening to me? Zoe, are we just listening to me? No, who are we listening to? To Jesus, listening for God in the story. Who else are we listening to? Each other. So we try and respect each other when we're talking. Sometimes we get very excited and it's hard to wait our turn because we have all these thoughts, but we've been practicing not only listening when I talk, but listening when each other talk, because that's part of being in community with each other. And so the bell gives us a moment to really practice our listening. We take a deep breath before I ring the bell, and then we breathe out, and we wait until we can't hear the bell anymore. Now, we do have some very, very good listeners for the bell, so we've had to institute a new rule where I am going to tell you when to open our eyes and start the story. Otherwise, we just listen for a very long time, and sometimes we gotta get the story going. So I'm going to ring the bell. We're going to start our story. Our story is a time to listen. If we have a pressing question, I welcome it from the kids or the adults. But typically we try and stick through the story and hold our questions for the wondering time. The wondering time is at the end of our story. And this is a special time to I ask questions of our kids. And I will ask questions of you all. And they're special questions. They're called wondering questions, because there is no way I can know the answer to that. And even though you might be answering for you today, we don't really know the answer for some of these things. And some of that is the mystery of God and the Spirit. And so this is a time to really breathe into that moment of, let's practice together. Let's wonder together about these stories that we can't always have all the answers to. So we're going to ring the bell. Are we ready, friends? Yeah? All right. Take a deep breath in. All right, and we can open our eyes and we are ready for our story. Now this is a special part that we have downstairs. This is a piece of the desert. We obviously can't have the whole desert in our room, but we do have a piece of it because a lot of stories of the people of God happen in the desert. We've been learning about a family that has Jacob as the father. And Jacob and his family lived in the desert where not a lot of food grows, not a lot of rain comes. Desert can be a hard place to live. And so through all these stories that we've been learning about, we learned about Joseph. And Joseph went to Egypt and ended up helping Egypt protect themselves from this great famine. But Jacob and his family had no food where they lived. So the people of God, Jacob and his family, had to make a really hard decision. They had to decide to walk through the desert with all their family and their children and their animals and go to a foreign place. Now, in Egypt, because Joseph had saved the land and helped the king called Pharaoh, they were welcomed. And they began life in Egypt and started working there and living there and growing their family there. Many years passed, and the people of Egypt, or the people of God, stayed. And pharaohs changed, and slowly after Pharaoh and Pharaoh, they had forgotten what God and what Joseph had done for the people of Egypt. So the people of God started having to obey things that Pharaoh said for them to do. They had to eat when Pharaoh said to eat, sleep when Pharaoh said to work, or work when Pharaoh said to work. They became slaves. They became trapped in Egypt and could not go back home. But there was one person of God who was saved by 2 Egyptian women, who was put in a basket and went to live with Pharaoh's daughter. And although he was raised as Egyptian, he also was a person of God. So many years later, as he grew up, he ended up killing a man, an Egyptian man, because he saw him mistreating a slave. So he ran away into the desert. And in the desert, he became a shepherd and met a wife and decided to live his life there. But then he met God, and God told him that he must return to Egypt to save his people. Moses was scared. Moses didn't talk well and didn't understand how he could lead a people and save God's people. But God told him to go back. God said, I will give you the words, and your brother will be your helper. So then Moses went back to Egypt and went to the Pharaoh. And he told the Pharaoh to let my people go. And the Pharaoh said no. So things started happening in Egypt. All kinds of hard things began to happen to the Egyptian people. First, their water turned into blood. And Moses went back to the Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And the Pharaoh said, no. Then frogs came, and Moses asked again, and Pharaoh still said no. Then lice came, and Pharaoh still said no. Then flies came to Egypt, and Pharaoh still said no. Then the animals got sick, and Pharaoh still said no. People got sick with horrible boils on their skin, and Pharaoh still said no. Hail and fire came, and Pharaoh refused to let the people go. And then locusts came, and Moses went back again, and Pharaoh still said no. Darkness came over all of Egypt, and Pharaoh still refused. And then a terrible thing happened. Then the oldest son of every Egyptian family died, even the family of the Pharaoh. But the people of God's oldest children did not die, because they took the blood of a lamb and painted it over their door so that the angel of death passed over them. Moses went back to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And this time, Pharaoh said, yes. So the people of Israel, people of God, gathered all of their things, all of their belongings, all of their animals. They made food for their big journey that they were going to have to make. They made bread, but this bread, they didn't have time to let rise, so it was a different kind of bread. It was bread that we still have today that you can find in grocery stores called matzah. It was flat because they didn't have any time to let the yeast rise. So they packed their flatbread, they packed their animals, and they started leaving Egypt. They started walking and walking. And then they heard sounds they were hoping not to hear. They heard the beating of hoofbeats and the spinning of chariot wheels and people coming behind them. Pharaoh had changed his mind. Pharaoh and his men pushed the people of God all the way to the water. And they were not sure what they could do. But then, God came so close to Moses, and Moses came so close to God, that Moses knew how God was going to save them. And the water parted, and the people of God were able to pass through. I wonder how they were feeling. This one looks like he's running, so he was probably scared. This one was happy to be going to a place they could call their own. This one was confused by the waters being parted. And this one was nervous about how they would all get past. As the people of God made it past the water onto the other side of land, behind them the water closed again. And Pharaoh and his people could not get through. They were free, finally. They were so happy and so joyful that they just had to dance. And Miriam, Moses' sister, led the people in the dance as they danced and praised God for freeing them. Now, we ask our wondering questions. I wonder which part of the story you liked best. Ellie, which part of the story? You like when the water opened? It's a big imagination, right? That takes a lot of hard work to imagine what that might have looked like. Do you have a favorite part, Gail? I wonder which part was most important. This doesn't mean that there is one most important part of the story, but it's a way to start to think critically about the stories we read. What part is most important of this story? Yeah, Jeff.
I think for me, I think it's the faith it took to go to the part of the water.
Yeah.
Wading through the motions, really feel like it's a big step.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think for me, it was when Moses originally came back, because he didn't want to go back at all. He trusted God that he was going to lead him and take care of him.
Yeah. And he had no confidence in himself to be a leader. He said in the Bible, how can I even talk to these people? Jenny.
Trusting God that He is with him
Yeah.
no matter what.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. So when we go back to one of the first stories we started in the series was Abraham and Sarah going from place to place to place and learning that God was with them no matter where they were. And the trust that it took that God was still with them when they were slaves, and with them when they got to the edge of the sea, and with them when they went through the sea would be incredible. I wonder where you are in the story. Or what part of the story is about you today? This could be different than the most important part. This could be where you see yourself in the story today. If you see yourself as going back somewhere you don't want to go, or if you see yourself as walking through something completely uncertain on either side of you, waiting for the waters to crash back into you. So I wonder where you see yourself today.
The 40 years in the desert is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because the majority of our life we might be doing something that is not the exciting part of the story.
Yeah.
But like reminding myself that it's still important for preparation for what could be the exciting.
Yeah, that's true. And our last question, this one's a fan favorite. What part can we leave out and still have all we need to tell this story? Is there a part we can leave out and still have all we need? Yeah, Sammy, what part? You think all the plagues were a little overboard? Yeah. There were a lot, right? Yes. What part can we leave out and still have all we need? Yeah. Yeah. Do you think if we had skipped to that last terrible thing and done that first, Pharaoh could have changed his mind that quickly? Do you think all the plagues were necessary? We don't know. It's one of the things we wonder about, right? Because these terrible things sometimes are hard to comprehend in the Bible. And we have to ask these questions if we're going to be people of God and follow and claim this book as one of our cornerstones. We have to ask the hard questions.